come to order. If you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you'd remain standing for a moment of silence, please.
Let's take a moment to remember the 11 firefighters and 8 police officers that have passed since our last board meeting.
Thank you. Okay. First item up for bid, we have a new board member to officially swear back in. So Corey, Chief, are you doing the honors?
You'd like to, unless you'd like to do it, sir?
We'll let you go ahead.
Come on up, we'll do it.
Okay.
You can do it from memory.
Let me know where you want us to be. Right here?
I was going to do guys to be at the podium, to be
We'll
honest.
get this thing in the middle of us right here. That's good. All right, raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Corey Cooper,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona,
and the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona,
and that I will bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the same,
and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
and will defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and will defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and I will faithfully and impartially
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
of the office of governing board member
of the office of governing board member
of the Sedona Fire District
of the Sedona Fire District
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability,
So help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
Welcome
much.
back.
Thank you, board.
All right, and the board is whole again. Moving into the budget workshop, are we handing that to Gabe or are we handing that to you?
Yeah, definitely be Gabe. So, yes, it's Gabe for the budget workshop, and here you go. There you go. Okay.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, we have been working over the past month on the budget. Getting in kind of some last minute pieces. Still waiting on a few little items, but at this point, I think we've got the majority of the budget put together, and took the direction from the board last month. And so as we go through it, I'll kind of explain some of the changes we made since the original budget you've been presented. And then once we get some direction today, we'll get you the updated pieces for your board budget book, because there are some changes kind of throughout the budget. So first thing today, I'm going to kind of go over the results of the round study. If the board remembers, a couple months ago, Melissa, my colleague, had actually mentioned the benefits of looking at an economic study on the potential future of assessed value for the district. In as much as the AV is one of the biggest driving forces of our revenue, we felt it was important to get a economic outlook on what that assessed value was going to do, because they have much more resources than we do as accountants, frankly. And then finally, we're going to go over updates to the revenues for next year, updates to the expenses, the COLA impact, which is really kind of that big direction we got from the board as far as give us a couple different scenarios on what that looks like. And then finally, kind of the overview of where we are at with capital funding and expenditure piece. So starting with the rounds report, you guys should have received the full report ahead of the meeting, and I just want to kind of high level this now in front of the board. So what the rounds group does is they take historical data on demographics, assessed value, parcel growth, and other outside economic factors, and then project out for the next 10 years what the growth is going to be in our net assessed value. And in this case, they took the limited property value, which is our basis for our property taxes. And as you can see, in this year we saw the 5.3, they're projecting 5.6 for the following year, 5.6, and then kind of start to come down 5.3, 5.1. And what makes those numbers up is both the growth in assessed value, but they're also projecting new parcel growth, and when I say new parcel growth, new development of parcels, as well as they look at growth in population and another number of other factors. So it was good to get these numbers in for us. It definitely helps us from a planning perspective. If you remember, one of those concerns we have is the 325 cap rate and where we are in relation to that cap rate. With these growth numbers, it doesn't necessarily give us more money to spend, but what it does is give us the comfortability and the flexibility in that cap rate and basically growing that distance between where we project our rate's gonna go to over the next 10 years and how close it gets to that cap rate. And you'll see when we flip over to the long-term projections, you know, with these growth numbers, if we do experience these, we're gonna have roughly a 50-cent capacity in our overall tax rate than what we thought we were gonna have. So this has helped us a lot from a planning standpoint, and we wanna just cover this real quick with the board. Any questions?
Yeah, so the assessed value growth is a steady increase. I mean, certainly there's no negative years, although we didn't plan our negative years that we had. They occurred with the market correction. Are those numbers factoring in that there may be a market correction, or is this just sort of a rosy picture of it's always gonna grow?
No, so what's actually kind of interesting with some of the Prop 117 stuff is so you have your full cash value and you have your limited property value. So full cash value is on top here. Full cash value can grow and drop at any rate. It's the limited property value that's limited to only a 5% growth year over year. Again, these years you're seeing over 5% growth, it's because of new development. So what happens is if we see a drop in full cash value, and he sent me the numbers on the full cash, and there is a drop in full cash value around, I just want to say 2020, 2021. But as long as it doesn't drop below where the limited property value is, limited property value can still rise. And so although there's a market correction, a small market correction in coming up, it's not going to actually impact the limited property value because of some of the changes with Prop 117. So that is in there, however, it's actually not going to drop to the point where it's going to impact the limited property value growth.
Yeah, and as I understand it, it will never rise, it'll only rise to come up to meet the full cash value, but not ever exceed it.
Correct, it can never exceed it.
And it can go up as much as 5%. And in fact, it sounds like laws were interpreted to always have it go up 5%, which is interesting because it was originally stated as 0 to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Board, if you're looking at those numbers and you're seeing, you know, we've got some good growth years, which is what would be making sense from what we see out in the field. There's lots of growth going on, lots of building. So all that gets accounted for in some of those 5+ years. The comfortability of having these numbers in with an economist that's done that does this for a living, it's far better than the hopes that we kind of thought, oh, this looks good. Let's definitely conservatively approach our AV growth because we don't want to overstate it and be surprised. This gives us greater confidence of where those numbers are at. And this is the blessing of Prop 117.
Yeah.
Where there was no shiny spot for Prop 117. Now that it's in effect and now you're getting a chance to see it, well, those other years that Gabe was talking about, if we were back on full cash value, well, we'd be growing at a greater rate now. You'd see when we actually take those downturns, and that, what happens to the mill rate again? Test would go, right? You'd have this relationship. Here, this is growing up, so this is really steadily going to balance that mill rate and slow the growth of the mill rate. And I also look at those numbers and find it interesting just looking at, well, we're going to peak at 5.6. It's trending down beyond that. What happens after 10 years, I don't know, but you know, it's not that we're going to be having 5% growth years either. And as I think Gabe pointed out very importantly, this doesn't necessarily get us, means more money. It means that this is all related to the mill rate.
Exactly.
And the factors that
Yeah.
impact the mill rate. Also looks at the number of populations served and the percentage or the increase of about 1,000 people over the next 10 years, you know, increasing in population for the fire district. Again, where he gets that number, he's the economist that does that. Lastly, I think I look at the net assessed value in millions, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I'm taking a step on a ledge here, but you know, I think we were at over 900 million in assessed value before the downturn in economy, 2008, 2009. So 20 years later, we'll be where we're back at that assessed value. It just kind of points out where that recession and the impact of that recession. Granted, we did switch from full cash to limited, so there is also probably a little bit of an asterisk to that number. But it's 20 years later, we're back to the number of where we were in 2008. I think it's even less than that. I forget what it was, but it was 900 something. So it's more information than, whatever. But
Gabe, I have a question. What kind of a track record does this company have in their projections?
So I first used them 4 years ago with a consolidation study, and I know they've had other experience with other fire districts around the state, and as far as my knowledge base with them, and so far I could tell you that my knowledge of their accuracy with other projects I've worked with them on has been pretty good. They've been on point. They've been plus or minus about 0.3% on their projected numbers thus far. So. All right. With that, going into the budget itself. So property taxes, with the revisions and what we're looking at right now, we're looking at a property levy, tax levy of $14,123,505, which is reduced by $184,000 from the budget you saw last month. That changes the proposed tax rate down to $2.48 from $2.52. Today, I will say we're at $2.54. But again, we're talking about tax rate. Levy is still going up. It's the tax rate that's going down. So, and then FDAT again is still at current fiscal year levels. Once we I think at this point I'll be able to send this budget off to the county, and they're going to work on getting us kind of preliminary FDAT numbers so we can plug those in and see if there's any kind of changes there. On the non-levy revenue side, we did increase non-levy revenues to $2.4 million from $2.2 million. One of the things, look back at ambulance revenue historically, we've averaged over the last 3 years of 1.9 million in ambulance revenue, actually 1.99, although this year we are trending down from that. But I do feel comfortable kind of meeting in the middle there and going 1,975,000 for ambulance revenue next year. On the non-district fires as well, we had 50,000 in the budget for non-district fires. These are our wildland deployments. We've averaged 100,000 a year over the last 3 years, so we did increase that up 100,000. Another big area, yes.
Yes, Gabe, maybe this will be a question when Jason gives his, BC Coil gives his report, but I just wonder, with it looking like the fires are going to be closer to home, I just wonder, does that decrease our income because our equipment isn't traveling so far away? Have you looked at that at all?
So I have not. That is a concern. Obviously, another concern too is, and I'm going to try to avoid getting too operational here, but another concern is us being able to deploy out if we've got a risk in our local area. But I think going with the 100,000, which is a 50,000 increase, is conservative enough that if we don't see it, it's not a detrimental impact to the budget. So.
We'll get the 50,000 from somewhere else?
Yes.
Well, and this is what we talked about last month. We did what? Did 200 this year?
Right. This year.
So that was my point last month, was that budgeting 50 when we just did 200. Are we?
Okay.
I think there's room there to not levy that money. We should be. So
Yeah.
I like 100 better than 50.
Right, and I don't want to get too high because of some of Corey's concerns. Then we'll also talk about some equipment concerns. We had a Type 3 that was kind of on its last leg that has now been deemed, out of service. And so we'll talk about where that impact is in kind of these budget numbers as well. But there are things that can impact the revenue. But I think, as board chair has mentioned, we've seen much higher revenues. I think if we increase that 50 but still remain conservative on it, we're not betting on or projecting money that we may not see. At a high level, but we've got a reasonable number in there. It's not too high and it's not too low for what we need.
So as a point of reference, right now, we're at about 155,000 right now, and we currently have 2 units deployed as we speak that will, add to that revenue piece. And we're getting not late in the year. The new fire season's already upon us,
Yeah.
but it's fiscal year. We're middle of April already. So there's pretty much May and June, which could be really busy. So we, could easily surpass a $200,000 again this year. All estimates, who knows? We may get nothing. We're going to talk about an engine issue that we have, so that could actually concern our financial piece as well. So we got $100,000 is not a bad estimate. I think 200 would be inappropriate. 55 again is being conservative, and so we're trying to get to what the board chair asked last month and find it a better average and a more realistic. So.
Thank you.
Another piece was interest income. We historically have only seen around 10,000 in interest income year over year, but we were also operating with a much smaller fund balance. This year to date, we're already at 32,000 in interest income. With our growth in our fund balance, the development of the capital fund, which is going to average a much higher cash balance than we've historically had, I did increase interest income to 25,000 from the 10,000 that has historically been in there. And then plans review fees increased 12,500, and that's related to utilizing an outside party to do some of the larger reviews. And I could be corrected if I'm wrong here, but also I do want to say we did add in an additional $10,000 expense because those reviews will be outsourced, so we will have a little bit of revenue on there. But so it is to the positive slightly. But I do say it's not a full $12,000 increase in revenue. There is an offsetting expense to have that third party review those plans. Okay. Questions? All right. On the expenditure side, the personnel expenses. So I do have 2 scenarios to present. One with the 2% COLA, and then one with a half-year 2% COLA occurring in January, or the same with what's the same number dollar amount in the overall budget is just doing a 1% COLA for the whole year. And I'll show those here in a second. We did get a quote back from Kairos on a healthcare risk pool, going into that healthcare plan instead of our current one. There is a reduced healthcare benefit cost of $100,000 by doing that. That is programmed into this budget. Healthcare risk pools, or joining a healthcare pool, usually has lower increases overall in benefit costs because it's essentially a self-insured plan. But there is the risk, though, if you have a catastrophic claim, that an organization could see not necessarily a higher increase, but a usage surcharge in a year that it realizes a higher increase in its usage.
Does that occur as a function of your next year's premium, or you are liable for a surcharge within the same plan year?
Next year's premium.
At which time you can shop again if you need
Correct.
to.
Would there be a cap on a surcharge, or how do they base the surcharge?
I don't know specifically on this plan. There's usually not a cap though on it, but so the way self-insured plans work is they are a self-funded pot, so they use their own dollars to fund the insurance costs. But for catastrophic claims, there is an insurance piece, an actual traditional type insurance or umbrella type insurance piece that kicks in and covers that. So, and not knowing the specifics on the Kairos plan, usually the surcharge would be based on the increased cost and premium now for that umbrella plan, so to speak.
So, board, if you remember, this is Ashton Tiffany is who manages the fund. Same group that managed the workers' comp risk pool that we were talking about last year this time. And same risks are there, that if you would have had a catastrophic event that, multiple ones or whatever, that created an unfair usage, that there's a potential for a surcharge, whether it's to the whole group or just to you or however that goes. That's the risk of the risk pool. But the number of savings is pretty significant, and you're still going to be money ahead if you did have a really bad year, and you should have to pay for that. Just like if another department or another agency had a really bad year, like we don't want to fund all their, but it's usually smoothed out over a couple, 3 years. And one spike isn't gonna create a problem. It's if something really catastrophic happened. And
Well,
the-
you're spreading the risk out over as many people as
It's
possible. The bigger the pool, the
13,000,
better. 13,000 lives or 13,000 groups?
13,000 belly buttons, as they call them in the business. So those are lives.
That's
So-
a very big pool.
Oh, that's, well, compared to right now we're fishing in a pool of 96 people. So our pool's only 96 belly buttons, or, well, not 96 belly buttons, 96 employees plus their spouses and whatever else. But, so we have a much higher risk in our current plan of having spikes and increases because of our specific use when we look at this
So the
opportunity.
experience rate across the whole, we're not, in other words, they're rating the whole pool.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, in the whole pool, you're getting those benefits.
We're not individual groups within a pool.
No.
We are all one group.
Correct.
Okay. That
Yep.
makes more sense.
Are there any other benefits to changing to this plan besides, like, are there certain benefits beyond our savings?
So I'll let
Yeah.
Chief or
So,
Nate speak to
yeah,
the
want me to start,
specific
or-
benefits of the plan.
So the plan itself is actually a lower out-of-pocket for individual and for family. So we're reducing the out-of-pocket costs and saving premium. So there's a plus there. It's on the Blue Cross Blue Shield network that we're currently on with additions. It includes the Mayo Hospital. It includes Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which we currently don't have. Those are out-of-network providers and create a whole different out-of-pocket deductible. So increasing that way. They have a telemedicine program that's kind of neat. So if you get sick, you don't have to go to the doctor. You can call on the FaceTime and get prescriptions and get treated that way for certain types of things. So it's an enhancement into what we currently have. The difference that we currently have a 90-10 plan. This is an 80-20 plan.
Can I offer one more thing?
Sure.
We're going to be able to offer our employees a choice of 3 plans, 3 different levels of deductible, and therefore 3 different levels of premium, a choice that we haven't had in quite a while that I'm aware of. So somebody who's a single might want a higher deductible. A family might want a lower deductible, and they're willing to pay the difference on that. That's just a great option that we haven't been able to do.
And so, to further clarify, besides those 3 options, which may be more tailored to your specific needs, the fire district still has a set cost. So our cost doesn't change, whichever plan you choose. We're funding each employee at the same dollar amount, so that it's a net neutral cost, depending if you want to have the higher or lower deductible plan that costs you more as an employee, doesn't cost the district anymore. And likewise, if you choose the plan that's cheaper, we'll offset some of that with some contributions to your health savings plan
And I keep thinking of great things here. One more option here with Kairos, I think is how they call that. They're also packaging the ancillary benefits. So we're not going to Aflac for some things or Prudential for some things. It's all one big package for everything that we need, and that helps us with administration.
So there's just, and it's the beauty of a risk pool in this case, that you're a member of the pool, and so any profits that you're making, profits meaning money that went to pay out for claims, gets redistributed or gets held out when this used to be called APEP, the Arizona Public Employee Health Plan, and when they merged into Kairos, I believe the number was, they got like $1 million credit as all the people that had been in the system and earned that. So when they dissolved the trust and moved to this, they had $1 million credit because that's the money that was left in the trust. That's the downside, is that if you had a deficit of $1 million, you'd owe $1 million. But that's not the likeliness of that happening. It's, I suppose, a potential, but that's not the track record you're seeing in these pools, and they operate multiple pools in this venue as well. So this is fire districts, cities. The city of Sedona's in the plan. Sedona school districts in the plan. So school districts, cities, fire districts, towns, cities, whatever, counties. They're all eligible folks. So it's all public employees in this pool. So anyway, we're excited for the opportunity. We're still vetting out a couple of the ancillary things that Betty spoke to confirm that those are going to make sense to switch to Kairos, but it looks promising at this point. That's the direction we're going, to put it all under one umbrella. And there's a cost savings of $100,000. It's pretty.
It sounds like a win-win.
It's a win-win. We just give you that caveat that somewhere down the road, if something, we have a catastrophic year or something, there could be a catch-up provision or something that we are not aware of. There's no plan, but I don't want you coming to me saying, you didn't tell us about that one. I really don't anticipate that occurring, but it is possible.
Chief. And then finally on the personnel side, workers' comp, at the time, when I did the PowerPoint, is still unknown. We did get one quote back, which is kind of in line with what we've got plugged into the budget. Copper Point has still not responded yet, so we're just gonna kind of wait and see what the quote comes back at before we have something plugged in. But we feel confident with kind of the numbers in the budget that we've got something that will work with the budget as presented. Operational expenses, Chief Mazulis looked back at the education funding for post-secondary. We're able to lower that a little bit. We did increase the end leave liability funding from $175,000 to $230,000. On the capital fund, as I mentioned before, with the failure of the Type 3, we increased capital funding in the first year from $1 million to 1.2 to kind of offset the cost of moving that planned purchase up into this coming budget year instead of 2 years down the road. And then just reminder on the board contingency, we did remove that. Now, when I say board contingency, that's the $200,000 that was in this year. There's still the $2 million board contingency fund balance, and as I mentioned here, there's still an unrestricted fund balance of an additional $1.5 million that can be utilized for kind of unknown events that occur. Now, again, that's something that's going to take formal board action to authorize the district to utilize, its unrestricted, unreserved fund balance for a purchase, an unbudgeted purchase. So that's kind of the update on the expenditure side. So what that looks like from a budgetary standpoint is, we do the 2% COLA starting in January, or a 1% COLA starting in July, we're looking at a total budget of $17,396,000, and that is at that tax rate that I had mentioned earlier.
240, essentially 249, 248.98 or something.
Yeah, 248.98.
So board, if I could take this moment to just talk about the COLA. So again, remember we have worked with labor groups to use the Social Security indicator for COLAs. That's 2%. That's 2% in January of 2018. Working through the concerns in the budget, hearing the issues with managing the budget and getting the mill rate down and getting the tax levy as low as possible. Both labor groups actually understand that and the complexities that go with it. Both have worked with their membership to explain the willingness to change to a 2% COLA in January of 19, if that's your prerogative, to do that as an interest to save money and understand the impacts that has to the budget. Certainly would appreciate the 2% COLA in January over a 1% in July. So as an interesting note, we used to use Western States CPI, and that came in at like 3.1%. So we made that change and they're comfortable and happy with the Social Security piece of that. But understand that the one we used a few years ago was actually a 3% that we'd be talking about if that's the number we had agreed to use. And so that's the number as Gabe's pointed out as it sits with a COLA. And I kudos to labor for understanding the complexities and the work we're doing behind the scenes to get that number as low as we possibly can, but also maintain our competitiveness in the workplace, provide benefits salary to our employees, and create what we've worked and agreed to talk about in spirit still in effect. So with that, I would entertain any questions.
Hey, Chief, so you're saying that labor would prefer a 2% in January rather than a 1% in July and another 1% in January?
Well,
1 and 1, or they want 2, or 2 would be be preferred.
1 and 1 is 2, but
True.
that's 1 and 3/4 what you just said. So we didn't talk about that.
Right.
So I'm sure they would love 1 in January and another 1 in. I mean, they're back in the room. I'm guessing you'd be okay with that. That's just going to add $45,000 to the budget.
No,
or
it just sounded like you said they would prefer the 2% in January.
2% in January. So status quo from July. to January, 2% January, the first payroll in January.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's a thank you to labor to understand that, because I think as we hear from the public that, you know, it's with many of our members in our district living outside, the feel is, well, you know, they're going to be looking to get paid as much as possible, but they don't live here. But this is just a clear indicator that they're as interested in this budget process, and they're willing to make that sacrifice to ensure that this is run as best as possible. And again, thank you to every member of that labor force negotiation team.
Yeah, and so look at those numbers there. If you did a 2% in July, you'd be at another $135,000. You'd be at 17.5 something. You'd have another 2.5 cents on the mill rate, almost 3 cents on the mill rate. So by that concession, if you will, and that understanding of what we're trying to do, that's 2 or 3 cents on the mill rate, and it's, you know, $135,000 lower budget there. So again, as you stated, kudos to them for understanding, appreciating. We're part of a team, and we're working to maintain, but also, you know, retain our employees, attract, you know, with a nice benefit package and a nice salary, and maintain all those pieces. So it's complicated, but they understand that, and so both groups were understanding. Oh, Corey's got a question.
Yeah. You know, the COLA, we've moved to doing the negotiations every 2 years instead of every year. Is correct?
The MOU is a 2-year MOU is what
Right.
we're striving for, but we
Yes.
do have discussions mid-year with minor adjustments and things that
Okay.
need to get adjusted. And certainly the COLA is also part of that. So next, you know, in January, as we're putting this 2% in place, if that's what you decide, the new COLA for Social Security will just be coming out.
Right.
And we'll have an idea of what the consideration would
Yeah.
be going forward. And I'm not sure we want to make this the practice that we just postpone the COLA every time till January. That's not necessarily what we need to do, but given the direction of the board to make this budget lean and mean and try to do everything we can, this is where we're coming up with the alternate solutions. But I don't think it's recommended that every year we just go to a January COLA. That may be what happens. That may be what you want to do. I don't know that myself or labor wants to make this our
Well,
go-to.
What I wanted to say about the COLA is that in general, it's based on inflation.
Correct.
So when we take away a COLA or take half of it away, we're taking away people's ability to buy, because things have become more expensive. That's what it's based on.
Correct.
So while I'm very much in favor of finding places in the budget where we can save money, and Gabe, you've been doing that very nicely, I feel that people deserve to be able to stay even with the inflationary rate, which is 2%. So I appreciate the offer of everybody to go lower, but I am in favor of COLAs because the reality is prices are going up.
Again, I don't think labor would complain that they'll take 2% in July. Just understand the complexities of
I do.
that math problem and the downside of that.
Is that 1% already factored in, or the half, whether it's 1% for the whole year or 2% starting in January, is it already factored into that bottom line right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So, like I said, if you were to add another percent, essentially in July, you'd add $135,000 in round numbers to that.
Yeah, it's a little less because of when step increases occur and stuff, but it is, yeah. Okay. So if we stick with this scenario, here's where we're looking at on our 10-year trend. So we did see our 5.3% increase this year. As you can see, I've updated our projections to match the round study. And then here's our property tax revenue growing. And then the revenues and the expenses for this year at $17,396,000, which is an increase of 237. And then that projects out, but more importantly, as you can see when we get to here, we've got $2.71 mill rate, whereas as last month when we presented, we're at 323, 325. So we did pick up a significant amount of capacity just by getting the results of that study. But again, that doesn't mean we have more money to spend. It just means we have capacity and the flexibility within our tax rate on being able to control the levy. Okay. Then the last piece here is with the full 2% COLA, and there's at 17,495. And then in this one, just go to this page here, you'll see that's where we've got the tax rate of 250 versus 248.9, and levy of 14,222 versus 14,123. So. Okay. Any questions so far? Finally, on the capital plan, the only thing I really want to point out here that's changed from last month is this component right here. Apparatus and vehicles did increase for the funding for that type 3. We also had an increase. We moved actually some things out of the operating budget. Not microfish.
Laserfish.
Laserfish. Out of the operating into capital, into the capital plan, as well as an exhaust system for the station, and then increase that funding slightly to accommodate for those additional expenses, realizing though overall we're still lowering the budget from what we originally presented last month from an operating standpoint, and then kind of leveled out again the capital funding plan to get us up to that 1.5 million that we need to meet the long-term capital funding plan.
So board, we need to, I guess at this point, talk about that type 3 engine, because I don't think it's on the agenda anywhere, correct? So the type 3 engine, we have 2 type 3 engines, and one of them, we had a meeting of our engine bosses and our wildland team, and talked about some of the challenges they've had on some fires with this engine. Been on fires pumping, trying to maintain a line, and the engine shuts down for no reason. And then they got to get it back in, and they have to touch a screw and hold the light bulb, and someone else has to turn the knob and kick it twice, and then it sometimes kicks over and starts. And in that environment, we can't afford to have an engine not work and have people maybe get burned over by a fire or something like that. We've done extensive work trying to really figure out where the gremlin is that gets this thing to work. It's old. What's the year of the truck, Jeff? Or Jason, the one 95? It's definitely 20 years old at least, right? I mean, so it's on the docket to be replaced anyway. So instead of spending a whole bunch of money chasing down what we already spent years trying to find. We had moved that in the budget. We're moving it back into this year's budget. Actually, we're probably going to come to you in May and ask you to fund that out of the capital budget, as we were talking about doing. We have the money in our capital budget currently to fund that, so we can get that going, because we really need that tool in our arsenal of equipment for wildland firefighting. Our other engine is just not cutting it either. Both of those have been on the docket to get replaced, and so we've decided at this point that one's not safe to really go. It's not unsafe, it's just not a good vehicle to be taking across the country, and so we're kind of limiting that to more initial attack for our Verde Valley region only. So the sooner we can get this truck ordered, the sooner we can get it in place. And I don't know what the build time is on a truck like that. I don't know if you know, Jason, or? No. So certainly you don't go buy it off the shelf and pick it up tomorrow type of thing. So so we want to get that ordered sooner than later so we can get it, able to get it to deploy. We're looking at a pretty standard model that's a California spec, so they have that in place. But we talked about it a couple times. So we've moved that in the budget. That means that essentially, while we added some to the we were going to do $1 million, we're doing 1.2 million now to help offset those variants at the bottom. And so we're comfortable with that. There's a lot of different ways we start looking at the priorities in that capital plan. That some things, if something has to shift, we can make some modifications. But we've moved a bunch of them around to try to accommodate the peaks and valleys in our budget and the peaks and valleys in our capital plans. We don't end up amassing this much money in the capital plan. We don't need to, but don't have this much when we need more. And so I just telling you that as you look at that whole capital plan, you may look at that and wonder, why is this truck here? We could have out of here. We might be asking to move stuff. If something breaks earlier, we might move it, which means that one of those years, instead of $1.7 million in the balance, there's only 1.1. And that might be what we're going to do. Just understand it's fluid based upon our needs, and we're estimating when things are going to be done at this current time. And good estimates, we're comfortable with them, but understand that this engine braking was not on our radar 2 weeks ago. We knew they were ending of life, but not the repairs we need to do at this point, and safety being a really critical factor for our folks in that environment as well. So much that we're not even using it for our own, that engine I talk about that keeps cutting out, we're not even using it for our own wildland fire. We're going to jettison it from our fleet and sell it off.
Chief, is there anything that specifically that we're going to bump back by moving this one forward, or is just?
No, in this case, we did not bump anything else back by moving this forward. It's I'll say fairly small, because $275,000-ish in round numbers isn't a small number.
Right.
But it's those variances, it doesn't affect those variances very much, and we've accommodated some of that by adding more money in this capital funding anyway. Certainly looking at the bottom of those variances, we don't ever get close to zero. But remember, all those numbers are also, we don't have the years, 10 years beyond that. We're going to have all those other purchases. So that's why you're trying to keep that balance and avoid all the discussion we had related to the bond and having money in the bank to buy the capital that we need. This is the solution to where we are. And, you know, it's another solution. It's just adding $1.2 to $1.5 million in our budget every year going forward as a set line item. It's just a different cost.
Chief, are we looking to possibility of possibly getting a demo unit like we've done in the past for some others?
I'll put it to either one of Jeff, do you know?
So there's a purchasing process piece that when you go for demos, you've got to go out and seek a bid kind of approach. With going on established governmental bids already in place that we can tag on to, we cut the timeline anywhere from 60 to 120 days to get bids in place and follow the state purchasing criterion from scratch. So we want to go out and buy a rig, and we don't have we can't tag a bid anywhere. We have to go out and seek bids from qualified vendors to submit to us, review them in a timely manner, submit into the fire board for review, and then process that. The upside to a spec or demo unit is that it's already to go, and there are trade shows. It's trade show season. Sometimes they'll let them go. Sometimes they hold on to them until the trade show season's done, and that's August, September. The manufacturer that we are trying to tag on to with CAL FIRE's spec is BME out of Boise. And they build hundreds of these per year for federal and state governments and local agencies. And we hope to, if we come in with a cash purchase, to get our foot in the door quicker, because they'll get their money sooner and pump it out in 90 to 120 days.
Thank you.
To maybe just finish that, if some vendor came and said, we've got a demo right here, you want to buy it? We would entertain that, so we're not opposed to it if it met the specs and whatever. We wouldn't be opposed to it. I just don't know that we've had that fall in our lap yet. And certainly stuff we'll be looking for if a vendor says, I got one. That would be great, but that's not there right now.
Chief, I think the only thing that, as Chief was kind of alluding to, that I just want to mention is like he said, for example, one of the things we did to kind of, reduce the impact of the levy was some station projects were pushed out further. But within this plan, we have the ability to, instead of waiting for a debt service to drop off, we could move something up and then just reduce the capital funding for those years. So there is that fluid and that flexibility within the plan. And I think the most important point to all of this is it is a plan, and everything in here is looked at the time that we planned on replacing it, if it is something that needs to be replaced or not at that time, so. With that, we'll move on to where we're at in the schedule. As I said, we've completed everything up to this point right now in the March through May period. The last few quotes we're waiting on are our property casualty and workers' comp. We are doing our final board workshop at the next meeting. It'll be just more of a final overview of the budget, and then at that point, we'll ask the board for tentative adoption of the budget. At that point, we'll go through our 20-day posting of the budget on the website, and then we'll come to the June board meeting and ask for formal ratification and approval of the budget. I guess at this point we need kind of some of that last minute final direction from the board as far as the COLA, the capital, the funding, the overall budget. Understanding that there are some of those workers' comp piece, although we know we have a quote that's in line with where we're at in the budget. And we did, project a small increase in our workers' comp and casualty insurance, which is in the budget as well. So we have those outlying items, I believe, are covered in the budget as it stands today. But really need to know from the board's perspective what they would like to see in that budget that we bring to them next month.
No, I'm good with what we've done so far.
So the big question, I think, is the COLA.
Yes.
So personally, I like the idea of the 2% in January. So I'm fine with that. You changed the other things I was looking at. I'm not sure there are any other answers you need right now, are there?
No, I think really the big one's the COLA.
Is there a consensus? Anybody else have a feeling on the COLA?
Yeah,
I don't have a consensus, but I'd be pleased to do a vote, so you'd like me to show that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then so by motion, then I would make a motion that the COLA be for 2% starting in January.
Second.
Okay, so we got a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so 2% in January,
All right.
and then I think that's all the direction we need until
That's it.
the next workshop.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask for 3.5 minutes, and we'll start our regular meeting, if that's okay.
You're the boss.
Okay.